The stars outside the window blinked like tiny candles in a dark room. Ely Morgan stood quietly, watching the space between galaxies. His ship moved slowly toward Ziara Prime, home of the Ziari species. He was a human envoy, a peace diplomat. And his mission was simple: exchange knowledge, shake hands, and return home. But he didn't know this mission would change not just his life, but the future of an entire species. The Ziari were unlike any race humans had met before: tall, silver-skinned beings with glowing blue eyes and minds sharper than Earth's greatest computers. They had no emotions, no families, no love. They lived to serve order, logic, and purpose. To them, life was a process, not a feeling. Eli arrived at the main hall, where hundreds of Ziari moved in silence. No chatter, no laughter, just steps and screens. He felt like a color dropped in black and white paint. The Ziari High Commander, a woman named Solara, walked toward him. Her face was smooth, perfect, unreadable. She was beautiful, not in a human way, but in a way that made you pause. She extended a long hand. Human representative, welcome to Ziara Prime. Her voice was flat, almost robotic. Thank you, Eli smiled, trying to be friendly. I hope our meeting will be pleasant. Solara raised an eyebrow. Pleasant, an unnecessary term, but we accept. They walked side by side through silver halls filled with glowing panels and silent workers. She explained how the Ziari worked, how they reproduced only in controlled labs. How do you raise your children then? Eli asked, curious. There is no raising, Solara replied. We create, we train, we assign. Eli nodded slowly, but inside he felt a strange sadness. Later that evening, Eli was given a tour of their reactor systems. Everything was running smooth, as expected from a race of pure logic. But suddenly, a loud alarm rang out, red lights flashing. A power coil exploded near the energy chamber, and a section of the platform collapsed. A Ziari technician screamed, falling toward the pit below. Without thinking, Eli ran forward, grabbed the falling figure's hand, and pulled them to safety. He didn't know until a moment later it was Solara. They both hit the floor hard, her body over his. Her face was inches from his, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes. Not light, not logic, but confusion, shock, fear. He slowly helped her sit up. Are you okay? He asked, breathless. She didn't reply right away. No Ziari had ever been touched like this. Not outside of reproduction labs. No one had ever held her to protect her. What did you do? She whispered. I saved you, he said softly. You were falling. I did not command you to assist. Me, she said, still staring at him. Eli smiled, wiping some dust from his jacket. I didn't need a command. I just care. That word echoed in her mind, care. She had read it in old Earth texts, but never used it, never felt it. The next day, things were different. Solara walked slower beside him, watched him closely. She asked questions she hadn't before. What is the purpose of care? Why do humans risk their lives for others? What is emotion? Eli tried to answer, but words failed him sometimes. How do you explain love, kindness, fear, or joy to someone who's never felt them? He told her stories, simple ones, of his mother hugging him as a child, of crying when his dog died. She listened in silence, her eyes searching, her thoughts racing. One night, she stood in front of her mirror, placing her hand over her chest. She didn't know why it felt warm there when she remembered his voice, why her hands trembled slightly when she saw him smile. She whispered to her reflection, "What is this feeling?" That question haunted her. The next morning, she went to the archives, secret rooms full of old Ziari knowledge. There, hidden behind layers of warnings, she found what she was looking for. A word, ancient and forbidden. Emotion, and under it, written in faded language. What makes us weak is what makes us truly alive. Solara touched the words, and for the first time in her life, felt a tear slip from her eye. She didn't know yet, but that small drop of water would be the beginning of a storm. *, The Ziari did not dream, but that night, Solara saw something while her body rested, not data, not logic, but something soft and flickering. She was standing in a human forest, strange light filtering through green leaves, and in front of her stood Eli, reaching out his hand, smiling. She did not speak, nor did he, but the feeling in that silence woke her up trembling. She sat upright in her rest pod, her breath uneven. Was that a dream? Impossible, she told herself. Ziari brains were not built for imagination. And yet, she remembered every second. She needed answers by morning. Solara requested full permission to study Eli more closely. The council approved it without question. Humans were still unpredictable, and close observation made sense to them. But Solara had a different reason, one she didn't mention in her report. She didn't want to observe him, she wanted to understand him. She took him to places Ziari rarely visited. Biodomes with synthetic rain and gardens. Quiet research halls where children were grown in pods. Ailey looked at the children floating in glass tanks and said, "They'll never know a mother's hug." Solara blinked slowly. "Is a hug necessary for development?" Eli turned to her and said, "Not for the body, but maybe for the soul." That word again, soul. She added it to her growing list. Care, emotion, hug, soul. Each word was a puzzle. And he was the key that kept unlocking more questions. She watched him when he didn't know. He smiled at workers, even though they never smiled back. He laughed at his own jokes, even in silence. He stared at the sky for long minutes without saying a word. She started doing the same, copying his actions, trying to feel what he felt, but nothing happened. Not yet. Later, she secretly entered the observation room. It was used to study visitors, record behaviors, and gather cultural knowledge. She pulled up Eli's profile, videos, files, voice logs, emotional readings. She played a clip where he was speaking to someone back on Earth, a woman named Mara. His voice was soft, full of something she couldn't name. "I miss you," he had said. "I wish you could see the stars with me." Miss, another word for her list. She watched that clip 4 times, then closed the screen. Her fingers hovered over her chest again. No heartbeat change, no visible reaction. But inside her mind, she knew something was shifting. Quietly, Eli noticed her change too. "You've been quiet lately," he said during a walk through the lower corridors. "I am analyzing new data," she replied quickly, avoiding his eyes. "You mean emotions?" he asked, half smiling. She stopped. "Is it so easy to see?" "It's not hard," he replied. "You're asking questions no Ziari would ever ask." She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think I'm broken?" He shook his head gently. "No, I think you're waking up." That night, Solara didn't go to the archives. She went to her private chamber, dimmed the lights, and activated the atmosphere to mimic Earth's environment. She played a human song, slow, wordless, full of sound that stirred the air like wind. She sat cross-legged and just listened. She didn't understand the melody, but she felt it. A single tear rolled down her cheek. No reason, no explanation, just reaction. Meanwhile, the Ziari High Council watched quietly from afar. Their systems had flagged her emotional patterns. They had noticed a 0.03% increase in unusual behavior. They assigned a monitor, but said nothing to her yet. They were curious how far she would go before she broke. But Solara was not breaking, she was blooming. Slowly, silently, like a flower grown under moonlight instead of sun. And Eli, he didn't push her, he just stayed nearby, like gravity, letting her orbit closer with every breath. At the end of the week, she asked him to join her for a private observation shift. They stood together in the control dome, watching meteor streams pass across the glass ceiling. Neither spoke, until she finally asked, "What does it mean to feel connected to someone?" Ailey turned to her, eyes gentle. "It means," he said, "you're not alone anymore, even when you are." She turned to face the stars again, and in the reflection on the glass, she saw it, her own face, smiling for the first time. Without trying, without calculation, a real, small human smile. Asterisk, the Zyari believed in balance. They built cities without color, machines without noise, and lives without passion. Emotion was their ancient enemy, once part of them, now erased, or so they thought. But Solara's dreams were no longer silent. Each night, she found herself standing on strange human landscapes, oceans, meadows, cities of light, and always Eli was there, smiling at her from a distance. She would wake up gasping, heart still calm, but mind storming. These dreams didn't belong to a Zyari, they belonged to something. In between, one evening, when Eli had gone to the human rest chamber, Solara walked alone. She wasn't sure where she was going, only that her feet moved with purpose. She passed the Hall of Records, then the memory chamber, and then she stopped at a sealed door, one she had never been allowed to enter. The Archive of Forbidden's Histories. It was protected by voice code and neural ID, but she was High Commander. Her access was enough. The door opened with a soft hiss. Dust floated in the dim light, and old machines blinked in slow rhythms. No Zyari had stepped inside this room for over 200 years. She walked through narrow aisles of locked terminals and memory scrolls, and then she found it, a file marked The Fall of Emotion. She touched the panel, and a projection lit. Up in the air. Words spoken by an elder Zyari long ago echoed in the chamber. We once felt love and fear, hope and grief, but emotion brought chaos. It made us weak, divided, and irrational, so we removed it from our minds, from our systems, from our children. Solara watched old footage, Zyari laughing, dancing, even crying. They looked free, alive, human in a strange way. Then she saw images of war, betrayal, heartbreak. It was true. Emotion had nearly destroyed them, but it had also made them more complete. She sat down in silence, a dozen questions spinning in her head. Was she the first to feel again? Or had others hidden it like a disease? Was emotion truly a danger or a forgotten strength? Her thoughts were interrupted by a whisper. No voice, just a memory, Eli's voice, in her mind. It's not about control, it's about connection. Connection. The word felt warm again, like soft fire in a cold room. She closed the archive and left. But something had changed, not just in her thoughts, but in her presence when Eli saw her that evening. He paused. "You've seen something," he said gently. She nodded, eyes steady. "Yes, your people are not the only ones who once felt. And how does it make you feel?" He asked. "I don't know the word," she said, "but it is both heavy and light." That night, she made a choice. She returned to the council hall and submitted a request, a personal experiment. She wanted to explore emotional response within her own neural system. The request was rejected instantly. The council summoned her, voices sharp and cold. "You are walking a dangerous line, Solara," said one elder. "You risk destabilizing your own mind," said another. "Emotion is the reason we nearly went extinct," said a third. She stood calmly, but her hands were clenched behind her back. "I believe," she said quietly, "emotion may also be the reason we truly lived." Gasps, even among logic-bound elders. "Your exposure to the human is clouding your judgment. He has infected your pattern. You will be removed from leadership if this continues." Solara listened without blinking, then said, "Do what you must," and walked out. Ellie found her standing in the observation dome again. The stars were clear tonight, like they were listening. "I may be removed," she said. "Because of me?" He asked. "Because of me," she replied. "Because I want to feel." Eli reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. She leaned into the warmth, closing her eyes. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything that had no words. Later, alone in her quarters, she looked at her reflection again. But this time, she didn't ask questions. She simply whispered, "I am not broken," and for the first Time in Ziari history, someone believed it. Asterisk, there was a law on Zayara Prime older than the stars they studied. No Ziari shall touch another without function or command. It was written into their culture, their code, even their blood. Touch meant chaos. Touch led to emotion, and emotion led to ruin. But Solara was no longer afraid of ruins, because lately, the walls around her heart felt more like a prison than a shield. And Eli, he was the only one who never asked her to change. He just stood near, waiting, and she kept stepping closer. That morning, she invited Eli to a chamber that was never used anymore. A sensory simulation room once designed to train Ziari in unfamiliar environments. She activated the earth setting. Warm air, soft grass, sunlight filtered through moving clouds. Eli walked in, surprised. "This feels like home," he said, smiling. "I want to understand pleasure," Solara said simply, without shame. Without fear, Eli looked at her for a long moment, unsure what she meant. Then he walked toward her slowly. "Pleasure isn't just about sensation," he said. "It's about safety, connection, being seen." She nodded as if she had heard. A truth she already knew. "I don't want data," she whispered. "I want experience." They sat down side by side on the soft grass, not touching, just close. Eli told her stories, not dramatic, not romantic, just real. How his father taught him to ride a bike. How a girl once broke his heart in school. How he cried watching a movie because the character felt alone. Solara didn't speak, but her eyes never left him. Each story painted a piece of a picture she'd never seen before. The map of the human heart. Then came the moment. Small, quiet, yet massive. Eli turned his hand upward between them. Open, waiting, no command, no demand, just invitation. And Solara, with a breath so light it could have been wind, placed her hand in his. For Ziari, this was not casual, this was not physical. This was sacred. Her skin tingled, her neural pathways fired in ways the medical texts never described. But it wasn't pain. It was awakening. She didn't pull away, not this time. "Why does this feel like flying?" she asked quietly. Eli chuckled. "Maybe because it's freedom." She looked at him then, really looked, not as a subject, or a human, or a threat, but as someone who had changed her, without force, without instruction, just by being. He didn't kiss her, he didn't need to, their joined hands said enough. But the peace didn't last long. The simulation room door opened without warning. 3 council guards stepped inside, weapons raised. "Commander Solara," one of them said. "You are to report to the High Council immediately." Her hand slipped from Eli's slowly, but she didn't hide the touch. "I understand," she said, standing tall. Eli stood too, but the guards ignored him. This wasn't his battle, not yet. As she walked through the corridor toward judgment, Solara felt no regret. She had touched another being. She had felt warmth. She had chosen to at the council hall. The elders were waiting, their expressions neutral, their eyes sharp. "You violated our deepest code," one of them said. "You initiated emotional exchange with a human," another added. Solara remained calm. "I did," she said, voice steady. "And I would do it again." Murmurs, even in a room built for silence. "You risked emotional corruption. You have endangered our unity. You are no longer Ziari." Solara took one step forward. "Then perhaps it is time the Ziari become something more." Her words echoed across the chamber like a wave breaking on a quiet shore. No one responded. No one expected this. They saw not a broken commander, but a blooming soul. Too late to stop. Too new to understand. Back in the human section of the compound, Eli sat in his room, staring at the sky through the glass. He didn't know what would happen next, but he remembered her hand, the way she held it, not with fear, but trust. And he whispered to himself, "She's not the same anymore." He was right. Solara had touched something ancient, and in doing so, she had awakened not just herself, but the possibility that the Ziari, all of them, might feel again. The first crack didn't appear in a wall, It appeared in a conversation between two Zyari scientists in a hallway, whispering about Silara. One of them said, "She smiled." The other replied, "I saw her touch the human." Their voices carried more shock than fear, because in a society built on silence, even a whisper felt like a scream. Silara walked through the corridors of the council dome. Heads turned slightly, not enough to seem obvious, but enough to show suspicion. She was still High Commander, still respected. But her choices had placed her on the edge of something dangerous, exile or evolution, and she could feel the line getting thinner every day. Eli had become more than a guest. He was now a symbol, a question floating through the Zyari system. What if humans were right? What if feelings weren't poison, but power? One evening, Silara and Eli met in the ancient garden dome, a place where Zyari no longer came, because plants grew too wildly there. It was quiet, full of light and uncontrolled beauty, like the inside of a forgotten heart. Eli looked around, then smiled. "This is the first place here that feels alive," Silara nodded. "It's the only place they let die naturally." She turned toward him, her voice lower than usual. "They're going to remove me." Eli's smile faded. "Because of me." "No," she said. "Because of me. Because I changed." He sat beside her on a stone bench. "Do you regret it?" She looked up at the glowing plants above. "I regret not knowing this feeling earlier. I regret thinking emptiness was peace." They sat in silence, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that held answers without words, but the council was no longer silent. They gathered in secret, voices sharper now. "Her presence is weakening our unity. Others are asking questions. We must act before the change spreads." The next morning, a public notice was issued. High Commander Silara is to be relieved of duty, effective immediately. No trial, no ceremony, just a cold transmission. Eli received the news from a technician with trembling hands. "They are afraid of her." The technician whispered, "But some of us, we are not." Within hours, Silara's chambers were locked, her access removed, her name erased from the command roster. But something unexpected happened. Zyari workers began to gather, not for protest, but for presence. They stood silently. Near the human quarters, near the garden dome, near the old archive halls. Not speaking, just existing. A quiet rebellion had begun, not in words, but in being. Eli walked to Silara's door and found her already waiting. She didn't look broken. She looked brighter. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I feel more free now than I ever did with power." She replied. That night, a group of elders visited her in secret. One of them, the oldest member of the council, said, "I remember when my grandmother cried. I was 5 years old, and I was told to forget it. But I never did." He looked at Silara and whispered, "What do we do when the system we built begins to choke us?" Silara replied calmly, "We breathe." Meanwhile, a special order was sent from the central command tower. The human must leave. Eli was no longer a diplomat. He was now considered a disruption. Guards arrived at his chamber, asking him to prepare for return transport. He didn't argue. He just asked, "Can I say goodbye?" They allowed it, only for protocol. But that moment of goodbye changed everything. In the garden dome, Silara stood waiting as Eli walked toward her one last time. Neither of them said much, because their hearts were too full of unspoken things. But just before the shuttle arrived, she stepped forward and placed her forehead against his. A Zyari gesture older than language, a symbol of trust, unity, surrender, and bond. She whispered, "They can remove you from here, but not from me." And he whispered back, "I'll find a way back." As the shuttle took off, a strange storm spread across Zyari networks. Messages began appearing between workers, young trainees, even mid-ranking officers, images of Silara, hand in hand with Eli. Quotes from ancient history about emotion, connection, purpose beyond logic. A quiet fire had started, and it was spreading fast. The council tried to shut it down, but it was too late. Something had already shifted, an idea, a feeling, and feelings. are hard to kill once they take root. Solara stood on the edge of the platform that night, alone but not lonely, because she now knew, even in silence. The heart speaks, asterisk. They say silence is peaceful, but not this kind. Not the silence that follows a goodbye. Not the silence that fills your chest when someone is gone. But their memory stays louder than the stars. Solara stood in the center of her empty chamber. No rank, no visitors, no purpose. Eli had left 3 days ago, but the echo of his voice still lingered in her thoughts. Her hands still remembered the shape of his. Her mind still tried to replay his laughter, but it sounded distant now, like it came from a different planet. The council had removed her quietly. No ceremony, no explanation to the people. But the people were watching. They noticed the way she walked differently now, not with pride, but with feeling. They noticed how she didn't bow to power anymore. She bowed only to truth, but inside her body, something was happening, something the council hadn't predicted. Solara was fading. Her neural patterns began to break from their rhythm. Her energy levels dropped. Her thoughts slowed. Doctors ran scans, blood tests, mind-link diagnostics, but they found nothing wrong. At least nothing they could explain with science. The truth was simple, yet terrifying. Her emotional core had awakened. And now, without connection, without warmth, without Eli, it was starving. Ziari were not built for feeling, so when she allowed herself to feel deeply, she crossed a line. There was no going back, no returning to cold logic. The system couldn't handle both worlds, and her body knew it. In a hidden lab, one young doctor broke the rules. He contacted Eli's ship mid-transit. "You have to come back," the message said. "She is dying, and we don't know how to save her." Eli didn't hesitate. He reversed his ship's course without command. He wasn't a diplomat now. He was something else, something stronger. Love wasn't written in Ziari law, but it moved faster than light that day. Back on Zayara Prime, Solara lay on a bio bed, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't angry, but she felt unfinished, like a song left without its last note. When Eli arrived at the medical wing, the guards tried to stop him, but the doctor who called him stood firm. "She doesn't need permission," he said. "She needs him." Eli entered the chamber quietly. Solara opened her eyes just enough to see him. A slow, tired smile appeared on her lips. "You came," she whispered. "I never really left," he replied, holding her hand. And in that moment, her vitals changed, slightly but clearly. A shift in rhythm, a pulse realigning. The beginning of healing. The doctor stood frozen, watching. Something science couldn't explain. A simple touch was restoring what machines could not. Emotion wasn't weakness, it was medicine. Over the next days, Solara slowly recovered. Eli stayed by her side, reading, talking, just breathing near her. She began to walk again, think again, live again. And with her recovery came a storm, not of sickness, but of awakening. Zayari citizens began requesting information about emotions, requesting art files, history clips, human music. Something had broken open inside their society, and it started with a touch, a word, a choice. The council met in emergency session. "Contain the infection," one elder said. "It's too late." Another whispered, "It has already become a seed. Then we must burn the field." The first snapped, but a younger voice rose. "No," said one junior counselor. "We must learn to water it." Change was coming, not in battles, but in bonds. Eli stood beside Solara as she was quietly reinstated, not with a title, but with a message. She didn't want power, she wanted purpose. And that purpose was to teach her people how to feel again. One evening, as they watched the stars from the old garden dome, Eli asked her, "Do you still believe emotions are dangerous?" She looked at the sky, then at him. "No," she said softly. "I believe the danger lies in never knowing them." The two of them sat together in silence, but this time it wasn't lonely, it was full. And for the first time in Ziari history, a leader had been saved not by logic, but by love. The Ziari sky had never looked so strange. For the first time in recorded memory, clouds were allowed to form naturally. They moved without design, without code, unpredictable, soft, beautiful. Much like the future Solara was about to create, she stood at the edge of the grand dome, dressed not in her command uniform, but in simple, flowing fabric, no badges, no ranks, only presence. Beside her, Eli adjusted a small translator unit on his wrist, even though he no longer needed it. Their connection had long outgrown the need for language. Below them, thousands of Zyari gathered, not in silence, but in quiet wonder. They had come by choice, not from command. Some came out of curiosity, others out of confusion, but all came with the feeling that something important was happening, and none of them wanted to miss it. Solara took a slow breath, not to calm herself, but to feel it. This was the breath of someone who had nearly been erased, but had returned, fuller than ever. "I was not born to feel," she said. Voice carried across the dome through soft amplifiers. "But I have learned that feeling is not a weakness. It is not chaos. It is not failure." She looked at their faces, still mostly expressionless, but not empty. "There is something inside all of us, buried beneath our design, waiting to be named." Eli watched her from the side. She was not the same being he had first met in that cold hallway. She had bloomed, not just into someone new, but into someone true. "In emotion, I found connection," Solara continued. "In connection, I found identity. And in identity, I found freedom." She paused, then stepped down from the platform, not above them, but with them. A child stepped forward, young, wide-eyed, nervous. He held out his hand, unsure why, unsure how. Solara knelt and took it gently. Gasps echoed around the dome, not in fear, but in awakening. That simple act, a hand in a hand, spread faster than any virus. Dozens followed, then hundreds. Touch, once forbidden, became a new language. And where there is touch, there is feeling, and where there is feeling, there is change. The council stood at the edge, watching it all unfold. The eldest member said nothing, but his hands trembled slightly. "Shall we stop this?" whispered one of the younger elders. The elder shook his head. "No," he replied. "You cannot stop a seed from becoming a tree." In the days that followed, Zyari culture began to shift. Slowly at first, a gesture here, a story there. Then rapidly, music in public halls, shared laughter in the learning centers. Even dreaming, once thought impossible, began to occur. New departments were formed: emotional health, creative expression, relational study. Solara and Eli didn't become rulers, they became guides, and when people asked them what to call this new age, they simply said, "Awakening." One evening, as the two of them walked under the twin moons, Solara paused. "There's something still strange to me," she said. "What's that?" Eli asked. "That this all began because you held my hand," Eli smiled. "Sometimes the smallest touch creates the biggest ripple." She leaned against him, not as a leader, not as a former commander, but as someone in love. The word still felt new, but no longer foreign. It had become hers fully as they watched a group of young Zyari dance in a nearby field, freely, clumsily, joyfully. Solara whispered, "I wonder what we will become next." Eli looked at her and said, "Whatever it is, it will be real." And so it was, from procreation to pleasure, from silence to song, from function to feeling. One human changed one Zyari, and that Zyari changed a world. Not with war, not with power, but with the oldest force in the universe, love.